Well, we have to bring him to justice, and then absolutely he will face the consequences for his crimes. But let's remember, Jillian, that what has happened, thousands and thousands of Tren de Aragua members have come into this country and perpetuated crimes. We have brought them to justice. We've arrested them. We've gotten them out of the country as well, sent them back to Venezuela. We're going to continue deporting criminals to face the consequences in their country. And that's our hope, is that we can continue to do this action now that President Trump has addressed Maduro and his wife and brought them to justice, and will continue to go after the other individuals named in this indictment. We have lost millions of American lives because of the drug trafficking that they have perpetuated on our people.
At my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolás Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday, or frankly, in just a short period of time. All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly.
And it's so interesting to watch people defend those criminals, these dictators, these individuals that, Maduro was not a credible elected leader in Venezuela. And to watch individuals go out and protest and make threats on his behalf is unspeakable. And so this is a time when our country really will find out who loves America, who wants the freedoms and liberties that our country represents, and how they're willing to stand up and to defend it like President Trump is.
And regarding the ramifications, it's mixed opinions that we're seeing, of course, and evolving as we speak. But what are you looking at in terms of the outlook?
Yeah, look, I think this is the key question. So yes, a tactical success, but this has wide-ranging implications. The first of which, I guess, when we think about Venezuela, the president, Donald Trump, gave a press conference where he talked about the US ruling Venezuela. When you undertake military actions like this without a clear political outcome, it can become a bit of a quagmire. And we've seen that in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, we're not suggesting that Venezuela is anything like that, but there is a question about whether there is long-term thinking around what the US is trying to achieve here militarily. I think beyond that, yes, President Maduro was clearly a ruthless dictator. His, human rights record, his record of complying with legal votes, the 2024 election, very clearly, he was not actually lawfully elected. Despite that, though, there are real questions about what this means for international law. So really, under international law, you can only take an attack on another country if it's either endorsed by the UN Security Council, which this wasn't, or it's in self-defense. Now, that breaching of international law is part of a trend we're seeing where states are using military action or use of force across the world to achieve political aims. We've seen it, of course, in Europe in Russia's legal invasion of Ukraine. We've seen it in the Middle East. We've seen it between India and Pakistan, and Thailand and Cambodia. And now we've seen the US do it in Venezuela. What this means is that really the world order in terms of international law is fundamentally breaking down. And there's a worry that this might encourage other countries to do the same. And of course, in the Indo-Pacific, there's a question about, does this encourage China to take further action against Taiwan? We saw that big exercise just a week ago, Exercise Justice Mission. So I think that's a major concern. On the flip side, though, there is a question about whether this is actually re-establishing US deterrence. For the last decade or so, really ever since President Obama put down a red line in Syria and said that if the then leader of Syria used chemical weapons, that would be a red line for the US. The US didn't do anything after the leader did use chemical weapons. So there's been this question over the last decade about how much does US deterrence hold? Deterrence really rests on credibility, capability, and communications. And that credibility piece has been central. Now, I think that's one of the reasons Trump took action against Iran in June to re-establish deterrence. And there's a question about whether this action in Venezuela also does that, because it means that the US says they're going to do something and then they do it. And in some ways, that could be helpful for the Indo-Pacific and thinking about deterring China, but it could also be the flip side because of what it means for international law.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. And we had a former Navy SEAL on just before, Jennifer, and, you've made mention of Iraq, Afghanistan, but he also made mention that this particular situation is not ideologically driven, which was interesting to note when you compare what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, that's really true. And it doesn't actually look like, from what we're seeing anyway, that there's any US troops still on the ground there. So it is fundamentally different to those two. And the US reasons for doing this, look, they're not entirely clear. Of course, President Trump has talked about the narco-terrorist state that is Venezuela, and this is all about narco-terrorism. But we know that that's not really the case. Now, there's some commentary that it's about oil. I don't think it is just about oil. I think it is also about re-establishing deterrence and reducing the foothold of countries like Russia in the US's backyard. In fact, in the last 12 months, Venezuela signed a new strategic partnership with Russia, which is going to be really concerning to the US. So I agree. I don't think it's ideologically based. I think it's about a multitude of factors. I think oil's a part of it. I don't think drugs is part of it, but I do think deterrence is a key element of it.
All right. And then moving forward, what will you be looking out for in the next 24 to 48 hours?
Look, I think how the world reacts will be key. I think also how the US treats President Maduro. So they very much said that this is a law enforcement action. There's a question about US jurisdiction. But if they do it that way, and if he is charged and there is a legitimate trial as opposed to a show trial, that reestablishes some legitimacy for the US. But it will be interesting to see how countries like China, etc., react, and what this means in the next 6 months for how they might take action against other areas or countries. And that's that. What does it mean for international law, and has that fundamentally broken down?
Yes, a lot to it, and certainly, unfolding as we speak. Jennifer Parker, always appreciate your time and analysis.
Thanks so much.